Gemara. So the last we answered was we were discussing how do we know that there's such a concept that you could rely on the chazaka, because we were talking about relying on the chazaka, Lagabi the chazaka of Avhuna, who introduced chazaka to us, that every animal is becheskas aser until we know b'menishchata. Then we had becheskas kosher until you know b'may nitrafa. So we were learning all about chazaka. So where does this concept of chazaka come from? The Gemara wanted to suggest that it comes from that by nigei batim, the kohen is told to leave the house and then lock it up. And the question is, how would he know that the nega didn't shrink from the time that he turned around to leave the house till when he makes the official hesker? So it must be a chazaka. Rabbi Yaakov said you don't have a raya. Maybe he walks it backwards. Maybe he cuts an opening in the wall if his vision would be obstructed. Even if he went home, maybe he had information. He had people informing him that there was a nega that still didn't change in size. So according to Rabbi Yaakov, we do not have a raya that there is a din chazaka. So it must be halacha l'Moshe Messinai according to Rabbi Yaakov. Why am I saying Allah Moshe Messinai? Because I think that's what's going to come out in the Gemara shortly. Now the Gemara said, now that we've dealt with the Makar of Chazaka, Minah HaMilsa, that's on the second line of Yud Aleph and Amud Aleph, Minah HaMilsa, Damar Rabban Zil Basar Ruba. How do you know you go Basar Roif? Minolan. So Tosis right away jumps in and says, V'mtaimar, I don't understand. Kivin Damrinon, since we have a rule of Zil Basar Chazaka, which we've already proven from Sukkim, Kol Shekain Basar Ruba. Surely you'd go Basar Roif. The Ruba of the Chazaka, Ruba Adif. We know in Svara, a Roif is stronger than Chazaka. Once you've shown a source for Chazaka in the Torah, which would be Negoyim, Negebatim. So by definition, we should understand that the Roif follows. V'yashloimar, the Rav Acher Bar Yaakov boy. The Shaila is according to Rav Acher Bar Yaakov, we don't have a raya from Psukim that Chazaka, that you go by Chazaka. He doesn't know it from a pasuk. Ulamadim afarsh ben Chaim. The Hadir Ruba Adif Mechazaka loy misvara eliafinan mipar aduma. If you're going to hold that it's not a svar that Roiv is stronger, so then our whole kasha evaporates because you need psukim for that as well. We know that by paraduma you go basar chazaka. We're going to see that soon. You go basar roif, even though there's a chazaka that contradicts the roif. The uki gavra shemaz in the love becheskas tame. You might have a cheskas kashrus of the paraduma, but how do you know? You also have a cheskas tuma of the person who's tame, who's being spritzed on from the paraduma. So therefore, asi shaper hacha. So here's where Tosha says quite clearly that Rabbi Yaakov must learn it from somewhere else, and I think we're going to see that in Rashi soon. Zok to Gemara. The Chsiv, it says in the pasuk, Achere Rabbim Lahatos, Shvek Gemara. That's black and white in the Torah. Zok to Gemara, that's Aruba de Isakamon. Kigoyin Tes Chanuyis Fisanhedrin. Loikama Boila, that's not what I'm looking for. Ruba de Isakamon means I have an actual right. I have 9 pieces of Basar Shchuta, 1 of Basar Mesa. There's an actual right here in front of me. It's not a statistical right. Or if there's members of the Sanhedrin, Roiv say Potter, me it says Chayiv, so the Sanhedrin rules that it's Potter. Kikam Aboilon, Ruba de Lesakamon, which is a statistical Roiv, Kagoin Katan, which Rashi explains. Can a Katan do Ibum? Can a Ketana be Nisyabeim? The problem is there is a miut, a minority of children who never become childbearing. They cannot do Yibum. So could we allow a Katan or Ketana to be involved in Yibum? Or do we need to be concerned maybe this child will not be childbearing when they reach age of maturity. And therefore, maybe we shouldn't let them. But we go Basar Roiv, since Roiv children are going to develop into childbearing people, therefore we could be soymech on it and we can allow it. And we're talking about chayv creations over here. So that's where we see, that's what we're looking for. How do we know that a katan and a ketana could do yibum? Minalan. Rabbi Lazar, Osya mereisha shal oila. We learn it out of the head of a carbon oila. The Omar Krov, the pasuk says, "V'nitach oisol linsacheha." You have to cut up an animal into its individual pieces, as dictated in the Torah. But oisol linsacheha v'loy nisachel linsachem. You're not allowed to cut any of the pieces. So the Torah lists you have to have a head and an arm and this. Those are not allowed to be cut. Those have to be brought complete. So the head has to be placed complete on the mizbech, meaning you cannot be boidik it for any treifus. Maybe the membrane around the brain is punctured. That is a simun treifa, and you cannot check it, and you can't cut the head open. And the lab b'shum darminon zil basa ruba. This must mean you go basa the ruba, the lesser one. It's a statistical roiv. Most animals are kosher. Fact the Gemara. I like Krubba. It's one of my favorite Simon Tarfus because of the famous story of the Ragachover. Somebody went to the Ragachover and he asked him for a skama to write him a haskama on the sefer that he wrote on Hilchos Treifus. So the Ragachover looked at the sefer and said, "I don't want to give you a haskama for this." So he said, "Okay, I understand, but could you at least do me a favor and suggest a name for my sefer?" So that I can at least write in the Akdama that I showed my sefer to the Ragachover, and he suggested this name. He says, that I can do for you. Call it Krumma Moech. Zag the Gemara weiter. Frag the Gemara, Elab Mishun Arina Zil Basarufa. Zag the Gemara, no, Mimai. Maybe you do cut open the head, and you are boidik it. Mimai Dilma de Palile. Maybe you cut it open, you don't totally separate the pieces, but you slice it, you make an incision to be able to pull it apart and look inside. That's not a problem. You only violate that. That's if you completely sever it into multiple pieces. If you're just cutting it open to get access, as Rashi says, Palile koiroi v'chaytzeoi v'lo yavdil. Life mechuber, as long as the pieces are still connected, less lanba, that would not be a violation of a loy nisachel and sachem. So you can't learn roy from Reisha Shalayla because you don't have to rely on roy there. There you can actually check. Mar Bared Ravina Amar, he had a different mikar for Ruba the lesser kaman. Asya mishviras etzem bepesach. You're prohibited from breaking any bones of a carbon pesach, but that will prevent you from being boidig properly for treifus. Why are you not allowed to break a bone of the carbon pesach? But the same thing. If I can't break open the skull, how am I going to check the krum shel mayach? Elalav mishum darmina zil basaruba. Zok Gemara, that's not a raya either. Mimai dilma de monach gumrasa al kalila. Who said you have to cut the skull open? Why can't you burn it open? You're allowed to put a fire on, put a coal on top of the skull, and then it'll burn it through. The Tanya we learned, are you allowed to burn open? Are you allowed to burn open? Is that not called breaking as well? You're not allowed to break a bone. The Tanya hamachadech begidim. You can cut gidin because gidin are bones. Or vasayre but someways ein boy mishum shviras etzem. So therefore, you don't have a raya from Korban Pesach. There you go, Basaroiv, maybe you actually check. Tosfos points out something a little bit interesting about Filu Chol Erev Pesach leaves for Shabbos. How are you going to be by the Geden? You're going to burn open the skull on Shabbos? Not allowed to. Zokt Tosfos Malacha Shei Efshar Lasos Erev Shabbos Doichas Shabbos. Everybody agrees. In order to fulfill the chiyuv of the carbon, you're allowed to do things that you could not possibly have prepared in advance, and you'd be allowed to do it. Zok to Gemara, let's try another raya. Nachem by Yitzchak Omar, Asya Mei Alya. Let's learn it from the tail of a korban shlomim. The Amar Achmona, the pasuk says, Chelboy ha'alya temima, the complete tail. Now the tailbone is not just a tail sticking out of the bottom, it actually is an extension of the spinal cord. So it says you have to place it on the mizbech, and you can't cut it open. You need to be concerned. Maybe the spinal cord was damaged, that paralyzes an animal, and that would make the animal into treifa. It must be that you go basarayv, and roiv animals have an intact spinal cord. Maybe, you know where you cut the tail off to put on the mizbech? Past where the two nerves leave the spinal cord to go down the legs. So after where the legs are connected to the spinal cord, further to the rear of that. Even if the spinal cord is damaged there, that wouldn't make the animal a treifa because that would paralyze the tail. It wouldn't paralyze the legs. The concern is if an animal's legs are paralyzed, it won't survive. So therefore, maybe the chiyuv to put the alya tamima on the mizbeach is only once you're past the place of connection of the legs and of the nerves that go down the legs. And therefore, there's no concern of tarfus over here, so I don't need drive. So the Torah says specifically where you must cut the tail to place on the mizbeach, and that is that's forward of the point where that junction happens between the legs and the spinal cord, and therefore you are going to be cutting those nerves. If there's a split in the spinal cord, it would impact the legs. Mokom shakloyos yatzis. That's where the kloyos yatzis, meaning at that junction point. Frek the Gemara. Mimai dilma the posachlei uvadaklei. Maybe you open up the tail, similar to what we had by the Rosh Ha'olah. V'imishum tamima hanamila hechad echad chalagamri aval hechad alayif less lanba. So once again, you could check the spinal cord without cutting it into pieces, even though you're going to make an incision to peek inside. It's called laparoscopic bedika. The only difference between this laparoscopic bedika and laparoscopic surgery is by this bedika the animal doesn't survive. Rav Sheshes Bared Ravidi Omar Asyama Egla Rufa. We learn it from the parsha of Egla Rufa. It says in the pasuk Omar Chmana Ha Arufa, and we learn from there Keshehi Shlema. You have to have a complete animal. You're not allowed to cut it up. It has to be a complete animal. Keshehi Shlema Tava. Freik the Gemara, but V'leichish Dilma Treifahi. Maybe this animal, this Egla, maybe this calf was a treifa. You must say that roiv animals are not treifa. The chitema might nafkamina. And if you're going to tell me why can't it be treifa? You're not eating it. You're not putting it on the carbon. You're just chopping its head off and letting it remain in the riverbed. Who said there's an issue of tarfus at all? It uses the lashon kapara. The Torah uses the word kapara, the expression of kapara, when it's describing dagla rufa. Kikochim, it's treated like kochim, and it may not have a mum, as Rashi says, kaper la'amcho Yisrael. So you see, it's calling that a kapara. Ma kochim asur b'ano, afi asur b'ano, v'hachanami l'yin treifa m'helsam tepuk. The same place from where we learn that the egla rufus asur b'ano would also tell us that it may not be a treifa. Rabbi Bar Rav Shila Amar, also mi para aduma. We learned it from para aduma, which is what Tosfos was alluding to as well. I'm sorry? That raya sticks. Yes, yeah, that will stick. That's right. It says Yushechti paraduma, and it says v'sarav. It's not right afterwards, but they're one right after another. Just like the condition of the paraduma by the shechita has to be tamim, complete. Af sreifasa kishehi shleima. So too, when you're burning it, it cannot be a treifa. But the problem is, how are you going to check? And there you have a chazaka negative. You have the Rav saying that this is a kosher paraduma, but you have a chazaka telling us that this man is tamei. That's what Tosfos was referring to. So you also see from the paraduma that Roiv is even stronger than the chazaka. Why do you need it to be without a mum? The paraduma, it's not a carbon anyway. Chatos karya rachmana. The Torah calls it a chatos. It says l'meini the chatasi. There's a longish Tosfos over here. The Tosfos at the bottom, it actually folds over onto base that has a long discussion as to what the paradum is, because we've had in the Gemara several times that the paradum is better kabayis. It's not a carbon, so it's not a carbon, but it is a chatos. It's a little bit of an interesting classification for this paraduma. But I'll call upon him. The Gemara maintains that it has to be a tamim. It cannot have a mum. Rabbi Acha Yaakov Amar Rabbi Acha Yaakov says, Asya misi'ir hamishtalech. We can learn it from the seir hamishtalech. At no point are you boidik that seir hamishtalech to see if it has a mum. But at time you're ready to be boidik, there's nothing left to be boidik. And we learn that sheyehu shneim shavim. They both have to be equal. They both have to be royu to be brought on the mizbeach as a korban oila. But you're never checking the one that's lazazel. The Gemara. Why aren't we concerned? Shema dilma chadmi nayu treifa. Maybe one of these animals is a treifa. Ella lav mishum darmin and zilba saruba. Rashi. Vidilma chadmi nayu haida azazel. Maybe the sir lazazel is a treifa. The bishlam hachtel Hashem. There you could say bodak leilach shchita. Ella chaveiroi mishtalech lutzuk ve'nishchat. It goes all the way down the mountain. So how are you going to ever check it? And if you're going to say the azazel is not a carbon anyway, so it is a treifa. What's the big deal? The goyal doesn't work unless both of the animals, the one that's going to go l'shem, and the one that's going to go l'azazel, are both royal to go l'shem, and then it's a legit goyal. So Rashi Eina Goyal Kavel Azazel Al Barei L'Shem Sharei B'Shas HaGoyal Ein Yedua Eze Yala L'Shem B'Shas HaGoyal you don't know Hilchach Shmeinon Memela the Treifa Loi Ma'isinon. So Zok Gemara V'Chitema Debak Kidolei. If you're going to say you're boidik it, Rashi's L'Achar D'Chiyos L'Tzuk. You climb down the mountain, you start picking up the pieces. But then we learned Lehoya Magia LeMechzis Sahar Ad Shenasa Evorim. And then Rashi, once it's broken into Evorim, v'su loy motzi bodakle, then yachaleda ezer shvir machayim. You can't tell which wounds were there before and which wounds came due to the animal being thrown over the mountain peak. Rav Mari Omar, you know where you're looking from? Asya mimake ova v'imoy. If one hits his father, he is going to be chayiv misa. How do you know it's his father? The Omar Chmona Katle, the Torah said you have to kill him. Maybe it's not his father. Ella, you must rely on a roiv. What is the roiv? It says roiv be'ilois achar habal. And you could assume it's some. I always say yes, roiv be'ilois achar habal, but achan veiv you have to rely on it. So I had a very cute story about this Gemara. Reb Chaim Brisker, as a little boy, was learning this Gemara. And he was asked, why did the Gemara bring a raya from Make Ova V'imoi that you must rely on the Roiv of Roiv Bilas Achar Baal? Why didn't the Gemara bring a raya from Mekalel Ova V'imoi? It would be the same thing. Why did the Gemara pick Make Ova V'imoi? So Reb Chaim said, without skipping a beat, Reb Chaim said, Make Ova V'imoi, you have to hit a specific person. You could be Mekalel your father without knowing who he is. Whoever my father is, he should go straight to hell, So you could curse your father without knowing. So in Mela, we had to be right from Makkah because we have to know that he's hitting the right person. Allah Mishnarinon Zil Basaruba. Roy Bila is Achrabal. Back to Gemara. Mimai. Who said? Dilma, maybe the only way you could ever convict somebody of Makkah of Avimai and kill him because of it is Kagoyin Shayu Aviv V'imai Chavushim B'Veisasurim. Maybe the father and the mother were locked up in a room and no one else had access to the room. And we saw him being born. So we know it's him. Zok Gemara Afilu Hachi Ein Apatrubus Larayis. When it comes to Arayis, someone is going to get into that room. There's no such thing as a hermetically sealed room when it comes to Arayis. Arayis gets a chanetza. And therefore, you always need to rely upon that roiv in order to be sure that this person was Makal of Avimai. Zok Gemara weiter. Rav Kahana says, we learn it from the fact that you kill somebody who's a Ritzeach. The Amar Achmona Katle. The Torah says you have to kill a Ritzeach. How do you know that the victim was going to live? If someone kills a treifa, if someone kills somebody who's going to die soon, he's not chayiv misa. So how could you ever kill a Ritzeach? You don't know if the victim was a treifa. Maybe the victim was a treifa, and therefore he shouldn't be mechuyev misa. Elalav, it must be mishum damrinan zilbas aruba. You say right people are not treif. V'chitema, v'chitema, the batkinelay, you do an autopsy and you check the victim to make sure he was not a treifa. Hakaminvil. We're not going to allow you to be menavel ameis by cutting it up or doing an autopsy. And if you're going to say mishum ibud nisham b'dahai ninvele, we're prepared to kill somebody. Normally, you won't do an autopsy, but when the question is when this fellow's life is hanging in the balance, maybe that's a worthwhile reason to do that autopsy. That won't help you because v'nechesh shema b'mokem sayif nekav hava. He's a murder victim. So let's say he was killed with a sword, maybe exactly where the slice was in the person's veshet, maybe right there is where the wound was, where he would have been found in treifa. So once again, you're forced to rely on a roiv. This is an important toshus that I want to learn. Here it is. So first I want. There's a very cute little toshus over here. Kivan shayu ava ve'imay chavushim b'veisa asurit. Frekt toshus. We have a chazaka in addition to the roiv that tells us that these are his parents. Why? For oid have a motzal medak the dilma mishum das linen basar chazaka the hamid ha'aim becheskas tzedekes. Just because someone's going to come in, who said she's going to let herself? So Mamela, you have a chazaka to say that it's his mother, and it's mother and father. That's right. That she is only with her husband. Zog to Gemara, Ravina Amar. Before we learn the next places, I want to look at the next Gemara. Ravina Amar, As Shema Edom Zaymin. We learn it from Edom Zaymin. The Amar Achmana. The Torah says if two people come along and say Reuven killed Shimon, and Reuven didn't kill Shimon, and we find out about it, now the two Edom who wanted Reuven to get killed, these two Edom get killed. It says Vasisim loy kasher zomam. V'leichish doma hachde sidubei treifahava. Maybe the murderer. Till now we were talking about the murder victim. Maybe the murderer, maybe Reuven was a treifa. Elalav mishum damrinan zil basaruba. It must be go basarayv. V'chitema de batkinalei. If you're going to say you could check him, the guy's alive. The only time Edom Zayman will be killed if their victim was Loyargu, if the victim of Reuven wasn't killed. But Hargu ain't Aragan. So Bedika would require, it's called a destructive inspection. Sometimes they inspect wells. There's a non-destructive and there's a destructive. A destructive means you take one of the wells that was done and you destroy it. And to examine it, but in the process, that well does not. That you can't use that. So this is a very much a destructive type of an inspection. So how would that work? So it must be that you go boss arrive and you assume that this fellow was alive. So Toshis has a cute little cheshbon over here. The chitema de bakinale, makshinon they ask the nelef meretzech gufei. We wanted to bring a raya from the fact that you kill a Ritzeach, it must be Gobas Haroiv, because maybe his victim was a treifa. Frek Toishvis, you have to know that he's not a treifa as well, because a treifa who kills is also potter from Isa. Do you know why a treifa who kills is potter from Isa? He's a murderer. Why would a treifa who kills be potter from Isa? So Toishvis, the Nelef Meretzech Chufei, das Lina Basaruba, the Dilma Haretzech Hu treifa. Maybe the Ritzeich is treifa, utreifa shahargas and nefesh potter, and the treifa who kills is potter. I guess the treifa is not muchiv; it has to be a person. Vishema, but we're going to see another reason in a minute. Vishema das linin basaruba. Maybe you still have a raya that you go basarayv. Midoloi chayshinon laharig as a treifa. we're not concerned about v'shema das linabas aruva midaloi chashina lagas etreifa loy neilafam. Maybe you cannot bring a raya from the fact that we're not worried, and we are soymach on the roiv to kill this murderer who's a treifa. Maybe from there you can't bring a raya. You know what I'm saying? This guy deserves it. So from the fact that we are soymach on the roiv to kill a murderer. No, that's not a raya that you can be soymach on roiv for other things. To kill a murderer, we're not going to be so makbid. The guy's a murderer, so he's a treifa. He got out with a loophole. So him will be Simon Charev. But now Tosfos says an interesting question. V'oid nearly, the taima, the treifa, shaharak potter, why is a treifa who kills potter? The teretz is, the hainu, because you cannot possibly get kosher Edom to be mazim him. The hainu mishum dava edus she'einat hayochal lazima. Why? Because he's a treifa. So even though his victim is not a treifa, if he's a treifa, you cannot have proper Edom, because Edom are not kosher unless you could be mazim them, and they would suffer the fate that they wanted to bring upon their victim. The problem is, Vibalti's a treifa, the Edom who would say Edis that he murdered, they would never be chayiv misa, because he might be a treifa. So therefore, he automatically walks free, because it would be impossible to have Edom that would say testimony that he killed. Good chap, right? The hainu mishum davar edus yet yochal lazima v'ikad linon edim kishahuzmu, and if you would kill them for falsely stating that this treifa was a murderer, lo shaper katlinon, it would not be right. You're not supposed to kill them. V'imkein, if that's the case, ein lo chiach. There's no way to prove from the fact that you kill a murderer. Ela b'may de katlinon la'edim. You could bring a raya from the Edom, which is where our Gemara brought a right from, and you're not worried, dilma dasidu bei treifava. We're not worried that the victim of the Edom Zoymin, the alleged murderer, you're not worried that he was treifa, you go basarel. Kidikaber b'samach. V'chein matzinu b'shem Rabbeinu Menachem HaKadosh. Ach koshali frektoshus. I still have one more problem. Ma'ika Omar. The Gemara asked, v'chitemu de baklinilei. You're boidikim. It doesn't make a difference. Even if you're boidikim later on, but they have to warn him before he says false edus. They have to warn him before he says false edus. Or if they're warning a Ritzayach, they have to warn the Ritzayach, if you kill this guy, you're going to be killed. They can't make that asra, because they don't know if the victim is a treifa or not at that point in time, even if you're boidik later. Mikol mokim havale asra safek is lav azlin basaruba. So the problem is there's something called asra safek lo shema asra. If Edom don't give proper warning, then the aegis is bottled. Doesn't work. So here you have a guy, a murderer. Reuben killed Shimon. They want to say aegis on Reuben that he killed Shimon. The Gemara says you need roiv because maybe Shimon was a treifa, right? Maybe the victim of the murder was a treifa. That's right, but the Gemara's case was maybe the victim was a treifa. I don't want to overcomplicate it. You can ask the kash everywhere. Maybe the victim was a treifa. So the Gemara says, no, you can be boidik. Maybe you're boidik. But if you're boidik, you're not boidik until after the guy was killed, until the guy's dead. Now, before the murder, when the Edom are warning this fellow, don't kill him, at that point, it's for sure asra safek. We don't know if this guy is a treifa. Right? They have to, don't kill him. If you kill him, you'll chayiv mitzvah. They cannot say that with confidence, because this guy might be a treifa. So, because of that, you have a raya that you go basarayv.
But if the victim is the one that focused,
right?
It can't be.
Only after he's killed.
Of course.
But my asra is not a good asra. My asra has to be, if you're going to kill this guy now, you're chayiv misa. That's not a good asra. Maybe you're not chayiv misa. The Edom have to be sure of what this perpetrator's punishment will be in the hasra. That's called, if not, it's called a hasra safek. You might be chayiv misa, you might not. We're going to have to check. That's not a proper hasra. So therefore, you have to go basarayv, because you definitely can't do an autopsy when the guy's still alive. So Zok Tosfos, maybe our Gemara has to hold that hasra safek shma asra. Tosfos says v'shema kasav the shma asra. I'm not sure if that's globally hasra safek shma asra that where Gemara is relying on to bring this raya, or maybe bedavka this type of safek would be shma asra.
That'll be in response.
Yep, I hear it. Okay, Zok the Gemara weiter. Tosfos has another kasha. we said even if you're going to make the autopsy doesn't prove anything, because maybe the place where the murderer put a sword and chopped the guy's neck off, maybe that's precisely where there was already a hole in the veshet. Maybe there was a siman treifa right over there. Frag Toisvis, who said that's how he killed him? Ein lahakshos mishkachas law kagoin shet pil benar. Say the way. Where do we kill a murderer? If the guy, if he's a drowning victim. So there you don't have the concern that maybe he was a treifa, because the body is completely intact. The Efshir Batzar Hachilim of decay. The reason why you can't, because the Torah doesn't just say if someone murders somebody else, it's Chayav Misa. The Torah is very specific. The Torah talks about the murder weapon. It doesn't say what room it was in, but it does say what the weapon was. Do you know what I'm talking about?
I don't know.
What? You don't have a clue. Okay? The Hakra b'chlietz u'b'chlivarzel b'evan ksiv. So clearly that means there was a wound on the body, and therefore the Gemara has that right. Maybe this fellow had already had brain surgery and his skull was already removed. And they saw that this person, the murder victim, he had a complete membrane and there was no damage to it. And then maybe the way he murdered this guy is because he punctured his brain membrane. It's a shtickle doichik to set that the case where it was punctured. Okay, we have to finish the Gemara, so we can't finish the whole Tosfos, but these are like interesting points that Tosfos does bring up. Zok the Gemara, Rabashi Omar Asya Meshchita Atzma. Instead of running through all these exotic cases, let's stick to the simple case of every shchita. The Torah says you need to shecht before you're allowed to eat meat. Maybe where the knife cuts the neck of the animal, maybe there was a pre-existing nekev. That's already a checkmate. It's the simplest, most obvious place, yet it's right in front of us. Amar Ravashi, Amrisa l'shmaitza kameder Rav Kahana. I prepared this discussion and I showed it to Rav Kahana that we have many kashas on places where you have other ways without a roiv, but then there are some places where there was a checkmate and you needed a roiv in order for it to work, and the most obvious case is shchita. And he told me you still don't have a raya, you go with a roiv. V'amulei Rav Kahana kamed Rav Simi, or maybe it was Rav Kahana who told it to Rav Simi. V'amulei, they responded, you still don't have a raya that you can always rely on roiv. You know why? V'dilma heicha de efsher hefsher. Maybe when you have no option, but you must go basaroiv, like when you're shechting an animal and you can't check if there was already a hole in the place of the knife. Yeah, there the Torah says you can go basaroiv. But if you could check, maybe the Torah is machayiv you to check. In other words, yes, the Torah says you could rely on roiv when there's no other option. But who said the Torah is giving you a carte blanche, never to check anymore, not to check any treifas, so you can go basaroiv? Maybe you have to check. I'll prove to you that there must be that concept of when you could check, you have to. Because according to Reb Meir, the Chayish Lamiyuta, Reb Meir holds we're Chayish Lamiyuta. He's Machmer. So you tell me Reb Meir held you're never allowed to eat any meat at all? Hachanami Deloyach Bisra? Would you say that according to Reb Meir, they never eat meat? Why? Because there's always a roiv you have to rely on. And he doesn't go bus a roiv. Maybe there was a hole there. And if you're going to say, yeah, maybe Reb Meir was a vegetarian. Maybe Reb Meir never ate meat, but we know he ate meat because the Torah is mechayiv him to eat meat. Pesach v'kachim ha'ikal meimar, where you're mechayiv, it says v'achaltu v'achlus habasar u'shlamim b'marchmana v'achlu oiso v'shakuba b'hem malamid shakabar tluya af b'achila ma'ikal meimar elevadei achel avadai, even Reb Meir who doesn't go b'sharoiv ate from kachim the samach aruba, he was samach and roiv heicha deloy evshar, where you had no choice. Yet he still argued by Katan Katana because he says, big deal. Why do you have to let them get married now? Delay the Yibam until they're adults, and we'll see if they're actually childbearing. And therefore, B'makam Efshar, he says, don't be son of Charav. So L'didan Nami, according to us as well, How could we learn there's a din rive? Maybe the din rive is only when we don't have any option. Elavadai halacha l'Moshe Messinai. That's what I was referring to at the beginning. It must be halacha l'Moshe Messinai. Hadus hamchinin aruba. Afilu heicha de efsher. That we're soimich on rive, even if you could have checked, that must be halacha l'Moshe Messinai. Or inami achere rabbi mahatos. Maybe you do learn it from the original pasuk that the Gemara deflected, and the Gemara said maybe that's only referring to Aruba de Isakamon, but it's not referring to Aruba de Lesakamon. Maybe now the Gemara says Mashma bein Aruba de Isakamon, bein Aruba de Lesakamon. The Maishna, hi, why is there really such a big difference between an actual rive and a statistical rive?
You can also say that it's also my.
I'm sorry?
Maybe you can say that is only where where you can't check.
Right. So
it's a loophole. Even midaraisa.
I mean, maybe that you say bittul b'roiv is
No, this is only in a case
of the loy efsher. Oh, seems to be whatever happened there. But no, but we know that's how Chazal, the Torah says this is how you should paskin by going b'saroiv. So the Torah is saying do it paskin not only hechel efsher. Whenever you have a psak halacha, go b'saroiv. So there would be efsher. But the Torah specifically says go b'saroiv.
The question is only whether it's
Rubid Isikaman or even Rubid Leskaman. The Ahal Milsa Samchinan, and this is a very, very, very important Rashi. The Ahal Milsa Samchinan, it's this Gemara that says that you could be Soymach Haroiv, Hecha, even Hecha the Efsher, Beloy Batkinan, call Yudches Treifus. Nakuva Sarai. If that's the case, why do we check the lungs? You go Basaroiv. That's from the Shchiach Bareisa, since it's common for a problem to occur in the lungs, Batkinan. What if the Raya went missing and you can't check it? So you might say, well, I can't check it. It's not kosher. Avali, you could eat it. Misachlo, the samchinan aha. You could be soivich on the roiv. Vadrafuna the Amar nishcheda becheskas heter medis. The ein mefarsim in adover. Medar look, Rashi, don't tell too many people about it. Who's going to see my little Rashi? No one's going to see it. Who learns Rashi? You don't have to worry about it. Don't tell too many people about it. Because it is, I'm just anonymous in Rashi. So Dr. Michael, hechad the efsher, hechad lo efsher, hachanami hechad the efsher, hechad the lo efsher. So therefore that wipes out any limud we have. That you go b'saroiv, so we have to rely on the fact that it's halacha l'Moshe Messinai that you can go b'saroiv. So Rabbi Acha ben Yaakov could say, you know what? Once we're throwing a roiv in there, we'll throw chazaka in as well. It's halacha l'Moshe Messinai. I hear. Rashi says don't tell too many people.
Well, the Gemara leaves you hanging.
So Rashi came up with a major kula on Hilchos Treifus. It was a big thing. You don't have to check the Reya if you don't have it. But Rashi didn't want to make a tumult. Rashi said, I'm a Rashiva, I'm not a Poisik. I don't get into politics. That's for Farsim side. Shkoyach.